There we go. Let's go back just a little bit before we continue on about kind of what you would call like the economics of a rock and roll band. And when you were touring all over the area, and you were saying maybe you had a management company, you had all that gear, you're making maybe just under $2,000 a week there, but then you were coming home with just $100. Like, how was that all broken out? I mean, management's maybe taking 10%, but do you have roadies that you're paying, or then hotels and food, and how did that all work out?
We didn't have really any roadies. We moved our gear ourselves. Like I say, our gear was expensive, and and the truck was very expensive truck at that time. So, and plus the hotel rooms, we had to pay for all that ourselves.
Mm-hmm.
And the gas was all taken off. And we were going out to Billings, Montana, Sioux Falls,
Mm-hmm.
South Dakota, and we'd play in town and commute back and forth to Dickinson and back. I was working a daytime job it was called Wiley Music at the time.
Okay.
It became Jacobson's, but so I was working actually 6 days a week, and so me and another guy, the guy who ran lights or sound and lights, had a job too. So we would commute back and forth like in Dickinson.
Wow.
Every night,
Mm-hmm.
every morning and every night, and yeah. But a lot of that, the gas and everything just added up, and we ended up just pretty much making nothing. And I mean, for the love of music, but it got to the point where I didn't want to be up there anymore, because the band at that time, we weren't really learning any new stuff.
Mm-hmm.
And it was just everything was getting so stale, and I wasn't making anything. That's kind of what caused me to quit. It
Right.
wasn't entertaining for me anymore.
Sure. And so during that time, though, you said that you were working at Wiley's. How did you get into that position, and exactly what were you doing there? Were you like the guitar technician there, or the salesperson?
Oh, and in Wiley's, I started there. This was in the 70s, probably 1976, I'm thinking. It was called Wiley Piano Company.
Mm-hmm.
And then they decided to open up a combo shop, with guitars and amps and band instruments and stuff like that. And one of the people that had worked there, sold pianos, I used to hang out with his son, which is a very fine pianist and organ player. And we used to get together and jam together in their basement. Well, he knew that I was really into this, and he called me. He says, "Would you be interested in working at a music store and ordering these guitars and stuff like that in?" So at the time I was working at a furniture store, and I said, "Oh yeah."
That's a lot lighter.
So that happened there, and but I was, like I say, working 6 days a week there, and ordering guitars, and that's kind of where I started with guitar repair too.
Mm-hmm.
Working on other people's instruments and that type of thing, and yeah, so I just learned just by hit and miss, things like that, and learned what I wanted on my guitars. I would kind of apply that to other people's guitars, how to set them up, and that type of thing.
Perfect. Yeah. Now, during that same time frame, those guitars that were coming into Wiley Music, at that time, were you going in before they even kind of were put on the wall for sale? Were you kind of going through them and looking at it?
I would look at
this is not a sellable guitar right now. I got to fix it.
I would adjust their necks and that type of thing, and all that. Make sure that they were playing correctly, and all that type of thing, and yeah, and so or if they went out of adjustment, I would go through them and
Yeah.
and adjust them and that type of thing. Yeah. So,
Awesome. And then, did you also kind of feel, depending on the environment of the room at that store, that you're finding out, okay, now we're going from winter to spring, and now everything's starting to go all
that
sorts
you
of.
know, if we found that out the hard way.
Yeah.
You know, we had some nice acoustic guitars. I mean, we didn't have Martins, but Guitarland was right down the street from us, and they had all the good franchises out
Okay.
there. But we still had some nice. We had a nice Japanese made. They were Aria guitars, and we had their top of the line acoustic. And one day I heard a pop. What was that?
Oh, yeah.
And here one of the tops had cracked
Yeah.
on it. And at that time, we didn't really know anything about the dryness.
Yep.
And that particular building was where we had it set up was very, very dry.
Yeah.
And eventually we did get a humidifier, and but yeah, we had and then you'd learn that way.
Yeah.
So,
And we'll probably touch on that as we go into the Eckroth story, because I know that I think version 1 of Eckroth was the Broadway location. Was that the
Broadway.
first one? Okay.
Yep.
And then the second one was the Washington one across in the grocery store,
Right,
and then
right.
the third one is the one across the way.
yeah.
There. Okay. Because I know that the second store, you had kind of an enclosure.
Yep.
For that purpose, I'm sure, and we'll talk more about that then. But yeah, I can absolutely tell from what you're saying that was part of the decision process. Hey, let me tell you, we're going to waste a lot of money if we don't do this.
Well, that store, whoever built the store or designed the store did have a humidification system in the store,
Okay.
but it still had a few problems
Mm-hmm.
in there. But it was more humid. Some of our we were on the Divide store. We had some Martin guitars. We became a Martin dealer at that time, and Taylor guitars.
Mm-hmm.
And I would keep those guitars in their hard cases, to
Yeah.
help seal that in. So,
Right.
it just the humidification system didn't really keep up
Sure.
in there. So
No, absolutely. And then again, we're talking, probably late 70s, 80s, where the technology of knowing where the room or building is drafty is probably not as
Mhm.
big as it became later on. So okay, fantastic. So then at Wiley's, setting up guitars, selling guitars, you were also part of the kind of the decision making of like, hey, this is the kind of stuff we need to bring into the store. Okay.
Yeah.
How'd that process go? How going to talking to like the owner who maybe is not a guitar player, and then you're having to go and kind of explain, this is why we want this, and like tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think when I first started on the Broadway, I mean they kind of left things up to me because they didn't have anybody that knew. I'm not patting myself on the back, but I knew a lot about guitars and vintage instruments and things like that. Even at that time, I was into the vintage thing, and in the Broadway store, one of the very first, we at that time a person could buy 1 or 2 Z's or 3 Z's of Gibson guitars, at that time, and we had a couple things there, but.
And when you say 1Z, 2Z, tell me about that.
You could see right now Gibson. There's a certain amount of money or guitars that equals money that you have to purchase a year to get into the Gibson franchise.
Yeah.
And for small dealers, these days it's very difficult.
Yeah.
There was. I know Jacobson's tried for a couple of years, and they couldn't keep replenishing what they had to. There's a place in town now called Solid Rock. He tried it for about a year and couldn't keep it up. And but
Is it because people were buying it and then you couldn't go and get replacement instruments, or
Well,
you
we-
couldn't sell enough
we
volume?
couldn't sell enough volume in a smaller area to keep up with Gibson's requirements,
Hmm.
and it was pretty stiff, and they still are pretty stiff requirements. Um, but that's just the way they are.
Right. So they
do
had
that.
different tier levels depending on the size
Actually,
of the
they
store?
didn't really know.
Oh, okay.
They were just like, okay, you have to take $150,000 wholesale for
Mhm.
this year, and you have to do that every year or whatever, you know,
Yeah.
and then take a certain amount of accessories and all this stuff. But at that time, in the early days of, or the late days of Wiley's, early days of Ekroth's that I was with, um, they weren't that way. You could order a couple of guitars from Gibson,
Yeah.
and they would send them to you.
Okay.
So there was no requirements like that. So
Wow.
big requirements. And then when I first started working with Ekroth, they it's at the time where Eddie Van Halen was really hot, and he started endorsing Kramer guitars. And I saw that in a catalog, and I said, okay, we got to get Kramer guitars here.
Hmm.
And so I jumped on that wagon. I just told my boss, I said, okay, we have to get Kramer guitars. And we sold a lot of Kramer guitars because of Eddie. And phenomenal. I was at a trade show one time, a NAMM show, and I mean, there was a lot of stars there
Sure.
at the trade shows. Anyway, it was announced that Eddie was walking into the building, and I saw him come in. I didn't actually see him come in. There was a crowd of people around him just following him
Mhm.
coming into the door.
Wow.
That's how influential he was.
Jeez.
And he was the guy. I
Yeah.
mean, I could say there was other guys from other bands, huge bands there that were just at these booths, and you could walk up to them and talk to them and all that
Mhm.
stuff. But Eddie, you can, yeah,
Yeah, there was
different
like a
league.
bubble of people around
Yeah,
him.
there was, yeah.
Oh, that's amazing.